He kissed my cheek and delivered the words, "You're disposable now." Margaret Danvers, once the wife who gave up everything, sat at the table, with her heart frozen in silence. Her husband's betrayal, a cold dismissal masked by polite words, echoed through the clinking glasses and quiet brunch chatter. But Margaret's world was about to shift. The woman who'd spent decades in the shadows of someone else's legacy was finally stepping into her own dot. By the time the day ended, the documents would be signed, and Margaret, she would own what she'd been made to believe wasn't hers. I'm curious, where in the world are you joining us from? Drop your city or country in the comments, and make sure you're subscribed for all the latest updates. Asterisk, he kissed my cheek and delivered the words, "You're disposable now." Asterisk, the warm din of Sunday brunch buzzed around the table, blinking glasses, murmured toasts, the sharp temps of hollandaise wafting from silver trays. Margaret sat, tall in her floral blouse, eyes shining with the forced brightness of a woman still trying. A single pearl earring glinted beneath her loose curls, the other hidden behind a careful tilt of her head. She had made a real effort. Her smile was soft, her lipstick a hopeful coral. David used to say she looked prettiest in coral. The server poured more orange juice into her flute. But Margaret didn't notice, because David had just kissed her cheek and said it. Asterisk, "You're disposable now." Asterisk, the world narrowed into a tunnel. She didn't hear the jazz trio or the laughter from the next table. All she heard was the hush at her own. Jenna dropped her fork with a clatter. Lily leaned forward slowly, resting her chin on her hand, the curve of her mouth twitching with thin amusement. Margaret's chest tightened, but her hands stayed flat on the white linen tablecloth. She wouldn't let them see her flinch. David took a long sip of his coffee, then tapped the edge of his saucer 3 times, a nervous tic she remembered from law school days, when he used to overthink cross-examinations. Now he just stood. "I'll leave you ladies to it," he muttered, already turning away. No apology, not even a glance back. Jenna called after him, a quiet "dad" that fell like a pebble in a canyon. Gone. Margaret finally looked across the table. Lily's gaze met hers like a dare. That smug stillness, elbows planted, French manicure gleaming, no need to speak. Her presence screamed ownership. Margaret blinked once. Her expression didn't change, but inside, something broke clean. She folded her napkin slowly and placed it beside her plate. Then, without a word, she reached into her purse and drew out her phone. The screen lit her face like a ghost. Her fingers hovered above the screen, her breath even. One tap, then another. She opened the message she'd drafted weeks ago, something she'd typed on a night filled with doubt and too much wine. Asterisk, "Grace, I'm ready. Proceed." Asterisk, she stared at it now, her thumb trembling. All these years, she'd let him lead through divorce negotiations, parenting schedules, estate arrangements. She'd nodded through the gaslighting, the smug legalese, the slow erasure of her identity. For what? A seat at a table where she was barely tolerated. Not anymore. Behind her, the brunch crowd swelled louder, unaware. Jenna looked at her mother with wide, unblinking eyes. "Mom, are you okay?" Margaret met her gaze, and for the first time in a decade, her voice was steady. "Yes, I'm fine." She stood up slowly, lifting her purse with the elegance of a woman heading into court, not running from it. With every step toward the exit, her spine straightened. No more asking for grace, no more waiting for someone else to name her worth. She reached the foyer, stopping just beneath the antique chandelier. Light fractured across her face in delicate shards. Her thumb hovered for a breath, then she pressed. "Send to Lawyer Grace." Grace whispered, "We walk quietly or not at all." The soft blue glow from Margaret's laptop painted shadows across the kitchen walls. Midnight. The world was asleep. But her heart drummed with wide-awake precision. She'd poured herself half a glass of wine, untouched. Outside, the wind pressed against the windows, restless. On screen, Grace appeared in a linen robe, her reading glasses low on her nose. Her voice was a hush, more lethal for its calm. "It can be done," she said, fingers steepled beneath her chin. "The question is, are you willing to hold the match?" Margaret sat still. Her hands were folded in her lap, the white nightgown pooling around her like an afterthought. The kitchen clock ticked behind hers, low, unforgiving. Grace continued, measured. "If we move before his cue to tax documents hit the system, we can lodge the motion without flagging his firm's attention. But once that window closes, he'll know you've been in the vault." Margaret didn't flinch. "I won't let him bury me," in another clause. Grace softened slightly. I believe you. But this isn't just paperwork, Margaret. You're asking me to ignite a financial inquiry that could land him in ethics court if this goes wide. Margaret looked away for the first time. Her reflection shimmered faintly in the dark kitchen window. Older, somehow. Wiser, lonelier. It won't go wide, she said quietly. I'm not interested in revenge, just truth. Grace tilted her head, her voice threading thinner. Then, we walk quietly or not at all. The call lingered in silence. Not heavy, just real. I'll send over the lodgement template, Grace added, tapping at her keyboard. We won't use your name directly. I'll run it through the discretionary filing channel, no triggers. But if David's accountant sees irregular activity, this entire thing could flip fast. Margaret nodded slowly, absorbing the risk. Her breath drew deeper. Understood. Grace hesitated, then leaned forward slightly. If you need reinforcement, there's someone who knows his system better than we do. Margaret looked up. Sarah. Grace said. The name dropped like a stone into cold water. David's first wife. They hadn't spoken in years, not since that fundraiser, the one where Sarah left early and never looked back. But Margaret remembered the look in her eyes, grief polished into armor. She talked to me, Margaret said. More a truth than a question. Just be delicate, Grace replied. She has her own ghosts. When the call ended, Margaret didn't move right away. The cursor blinked at the edge of a new message draft, waiting for her to find the words. She closed her eyes, and the image came back. Sarah standing in the rain outside a courthouse, coat unbuttoned, mascara tracking down one cheek. Margaret hadn't spoken then, just watched. Now, she typed. Hi Sarah, I know this is unexpected. I wouldn't ask unless it mattered. It's about David and some records you might still have access to. If you're willing to talk, even briefly, I'd be grateful. Discretion matters, so does timing. She hovered, then added, whatever you need in return, just say it. Her finger pressed send. The quiet returned. She breathed out slowly, shoulders falling for the first time in hours. She wasn't trembling anymore, not even a little. The laptop screen dimmed to sleep mode as she sat back, fingers lightly curled around the wine glass. She still didn't drink. Her body was too sharp now, too ready. Buzz, a message lit up her screen from Sarah. Whatever you need, I'm ready. My heart pounded, my power finally on paper. The office was barely furnished. 2 chairs, a cheap desk, and a rust-streaked mini-fridge humming in the corner. The windows faced an alley that smelled of fryer grease and wet concrete, but Margaret had chosen it for that exact reason. No one would look for power moves in a building that used to house a payday loan shop. She sat waiting, a manila folder in front of her, the lease clipped neatly inside. Every inch of her posture was calm, but beneath the surface, her heart beat with a deep, deliberate rhythm. Not nerves, not fear. Focus. The door creaked open. Sarah stepped in, her coat draped over one arm, curls damp from the drizzle outside. She wore little makeup, her eyes guarded but not cold. Place looks different, Sarah said, giving a half smile as she shut the door behind her. Margaret returned it gently. Different works for me these days. They sat for a few seconds. There was only the sound of rain streaking the windows. I'm not proud of how it ended, Sarah said finally, glancing down at her chipped manicure. Back then, I didn't think you wanted to hear anything from me. You were right, Margaret replied, quiet but honest. But that's changed now, Sarah nodded. No dramatics. Just the weight of 2 women who'd stood on the same battlefield at different times. On different fronts. Margaret opened the folder, sliding the paperwork across the table. You said you had access to the storage unit. These documents give me temporary power of attorney for one transaction. Nothing long-term. Just enough to authorize a records pull. Sarah read in silence, lips tightening as she scanned the fine print. She paused at the signature line. You're really going through with this? I already did, Margaret said. This just makes it cleaner. Still, Sarah hesitated. Her fingers hovered over the pen. If this gets back to him, you'll be dragged through hell. Margaret's voice didn't waver. He already dragged me. I'm just walking out. The pen moved. Signature firm. No flourish. No hesitation. Margaret let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her hand wrapped tightly around the papers as if they might vanish if she didn't anchor them to the table. My heart pounded, my power finally on paper. They stood together. No hug. No ceremony. Just a glance acknowledgement between survivors. On her way out, Margaret stopped by a bank kiosk tucked into the grocery parking lot. The wind had picked up, tugging at her coat. She fed the envelope with Sarah's check into the ATM slot slowly, watching it disappear into the machine's mouth. She tapped deposit. The screen blinked its confirmation. Later that evening, Lily sat perched on the edge of the sofa, scrolling half-heartedly through her phone. Her eyes flicked up as Margaret entered, carrying groceries in one hand, a set of newly notarized documents in the other. "You look busy," Lily said cautiously. Margaret offered a mild smile. "Just tying loose ends." There was no edge in her voice, no icy distance, just purpose. Lily studied her mother, unsure what had shifted, only that something unmistakably had. "You okay?" Lily asked. Margaret glanced at her daughter, something soft in her expression. "Better than okay." She moved past her and into the kitchen, her steps light, sure, for the first time in a long while. She didn't feel like she was performing stability. She owned it. She set the groceries down and opened the fridge. As she reached for the milk, her phone buzzed from her coat pocket. A tone she'd assigned long ago but hadn't heard in months. She froze, then pulled the phone out slowly. One message, from David. "What's happening with the ranch?" David's voice was clipped like an incoming storm. "Copy that." When the call ended, Margaret stared at the sunlight creeping across the floorboards, warm and indifferent. The world kept spinning. Papers moved. Systems clicked into place. But inside, her center held still tight and clear. She stood and walked back to the drawer, pulled it open, stared at the envelope again, then closed it once more. A test. She passed it. She walked into the kitchen, filled the kettle, and set it on the stove. The gas hissed softly before the flame caught. The smell of rain through the open window was thick with memory. Margaret rehearsed her explanation aloud as she waited, quiet, measured, not for David, not even for the courts, for herself. "I didn't take anything from him," she said softly. "I only reclaimed what he thought I'd never notice." The water boiled. She poured tea, and then 3 knocks. Low, measured. Her breath caught. She rose slowly, moved to the front door. The air shifted. A storm waiting at the threshold. Her hand curled around the knob. She opened it, and there he was, David Rainslick. Jaw tight, eyes unreadable. He demanded the keys. I offered cold facts instead. David stood just beyond the screen door, rainwater glistening on the shoulders of his tailored coat. His hair was flattened, lips pinched white, but his eyes held that old, familiar, fire-coiled, dangerous dot. Margaret didn't speak first. She watched the muscles in his jaw tighten as he exhaled through his nose, calculating the opening. "I want the keys," he said, voice clipped. Margaret didn't blink. "You don't live here anymore, David. You know what I mean." He stepped closer, the wooden porch groaning beneath his weight. "The ranch. I saw the ledger. You had no right." Her voice was even. "Per the lease revision filed January 5th, you relinquished all operational oversight. Grace has the signed amendment. Would you like a copy?" He looked momentarily stunned, as if he hadn't expected her to come armed with exact dates and legal calm. Rain tapped steadily on the porch roof. His shoes dripped onto the welcome mat like punctuation marks. "You're really going to hide behind paperwork?" he spat. Margaret's voice didn't rise. "I'm not hiding. I'm protecting what's mine." From behind her, Lily stood silently in the hallway, arms crossed over her chest, watching, learning. David's tone softened, suddenly shifting into that half-pleading lilt he used when charm served him better than fire. "It's not just about us, Margaret. It's the legacy. My father built that land from nothing. Do you really want your name attached to burning it down?" She looked at him like he was speaking a language she'd forgotten long ago. "Your father built it. You buried it in debt. I'm the one shoveling it out." He blinked. The rain behind him grew heavier, a steady hiss. "You signed," she added, voice quiet but steely-threaded. "You signed, David. No one forced your hand." He took a breath, preparing a rebuttal, but the porch light flicked on above the motion. A neighbor across the street was watching, barely hidden behind parted blinds. Another porch light across the cul-de-sac clicked on. The whole block had gone on alert. David looked around, as if suddenly aware he'd lost control of the frame. "You really want this out here?" he hissed. "You're the one who knocked," Margaret replied. His lips parted, then closed again. No words came. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then David turned, not with his usual theatrical huff but slow, reluctant, like someone realizing the door he'd always barged through was now shut for good. He stepped into the rain and descended the porch steps. his silhouette blurred against the wet driveway before he disappeared behind the driver's side door of a dark sedan. The car sat there for a moment. Then it reversed down the street without headlights. Margaret closed the door gently, locking it with a click. Behind her, Lily exhaled, almost imperceptibly. That was ... something. Margaret turned to her daughter, brushing a strand of hair from her own cheek where it had clung in the humidity. It was overdue. Lily nodded, then stepped forward and wrapped her arms around her mother's waist. Margaret stood still for a beat before embracing her back. Their shadows long and quiet under the kitchen light. The silence hummed for several seconds. Warm, now earned. Then Margaret's phone vibrated on the hallway table. She picked it up, thumb hovering. A new message from Sarah. Need more time on lease. Please don't move without me. I added one clause and his world tilted. The message from Sarah sat on Margaret's screen, a quiet aftershock. I wouldn't ask unless I had to. There's a baby. Not sure how far along, but it's real. I need time. Margaret sat motionless, her hand resting lightly on the keyboard. The cursor blinked, steady and expectant, but her thoughts galloped. Sarah, pregnant, the woman David had discarded so easily, now bore the most unignorable leverage of all. Margaret exhaled and clicked open the lease draft. The old language stared back at her clinical, unsigned power. She scrolled to the final clause and added a new line, slow and deliberate. In the event of dependent care or prenatal transition, leaseholding parties shall retain priority. Access to shared property for a period not to exceed 24 months, applicable retroactively to joint contracts. She paused. The language was precise. It would hold, and it would corner David just enough to make him squirm. Her fingers hovered above the keyboard before she added one more revision, buried in the margins. David G. Danvers is to be listed as informed third-party stakeholder for purposes of legal disclosure, not veto, just his name, not a voice, not a vote. She read it over 3 times, then again. From the doorway, Lily appeared, arms folded. You've been staring at that same paragraph for 15 minutes. Margaret didn't look up. It's a long paragraph. Lily hesitated, then stepped closer. I get what you're doing. I do, but if you tighten the screws too much, he'll claw through the walls. Margaret finally looked at her daughter. Sometimes the walls need to hold. Lily said nothing. Margaret turned back to the screen. Her fingers moved, slow and deliberate, saving the file, titling it lease_amendment_2025_V final.pdf, a name that made it sound like a spreadsheet, not a line in the sand. She hit print. The machine hummed to life, spitting out page after page, each line a stitch in a net she could not afford to miss. When it was done, she slid the warm stack into an envelope and sealed it with the firm press of her palm. She could feel her pulse in the paper. She had never written anything more precise or more personal. Hours passed before Sarah's reply came through. A photo-signed document. Timestamps, initials, everything exact. Underneath it, a simple message. It's in. Thank you for the space. For real. Margaret sat back, her breath shallow. It was done. No drama, no argument, just the quiet click of pieces locking into place. She stood and moved to the kitchen, pouring herself a glass of water she never quite drank. Her fingers drummed against the counter. The silence felt different now, not heavy, just alert. Her phone buzzed again. She didn't look at first, then she did. David, the message was short, brutal. Explain why I'm on that document. Her breath caught for the first time in weeks. Her hand trembled. He thought he was a silent partner he was about to pay. The screen glowed again. Margaret stood in the kitchen, the fridge still open behind her, milk in hand. When the second message from David appeared, longer this time, punctuated with sharp transactional cold. Margaret, I'm getting notice of missed payments on the ranch escrow. You were supposed to handle this quarter. What's going on? His tone pulsed through the screen, tight, controlled, legalistic, the voice of a man who knew how to spin chaos into accusation. Margaret set the milk down, closed the fridge, and slowly typed back. Nothing's going on. Everything's being reviewed. She pressed send, then tossed the phone on the counter like it was buzzing with heat. A few seconds later, it lit again, but she didn't look. She braced her hands on the countertop, exhaling slowly through her nose. Not fear, just pressure, the kind she'd known for decades but never confronted at full volume. The house creaked as wind pressed against the windows, rattling the storm door. Outside, a branch scraped across the roof with a long, irritated drag. Then her phone rang different tone. She glanced down. Unknown number. Local. She answered. This is Timo, a voice said in a rush. Your contractor. Sorry to bother. You just got a lockout warning from the lender. Said funds for the barn repairs bounced twice. Margaret's fingers gripped the counter edge. I sent that payment last Thursday. Doesn't look like it cleared. They're saying if it's not resolved by end of week, they'll freeze permits. I'd hate to stall. Now framing was nearly done. She closed her eyes. I'll take care of it. Appreciate it, Miss Danvers. Just wanted to keep you in the loop. The call ended. Margaret stood still. The faucet dripped once, twice. Behind her, the front door banged open hard. Wind chased in leaves, and cold. Lily appeared in the hallway, hair damp from the porch, cheeks flushed. Mom. Margaret didn't move. I saw the email, Lily added, voice smaller. The payment flag. Is this. Is this too much? Margaret turned, slowly. Her face was calm, but her eyes blazed, focused like a hawk circling. You don't need to worry about this, she said softly. Lily stepped closer, arms crossed tight against her chest. You always say that, even when things are crumbling. Margaret walked past her, shut the front door with one deliberate click, and locked it. She turned back. Let me be clear. I am not crumbling. Lily looked like she wanted to believe her. Margaret walked to the table, picked up her phone, and swiped through the banking app. The balances were lower than she liked, but still breathing. Still alive. She opened her laptop and pulled up the contractor invoice. Clicked, transferred, done. She opened another window. The moment she did, a new email slid into view. Subject line in bold red. Notice of foreclosure initiation, 60 days to RSP. Froze, the cursor hovering just beside it. Outside, thunder rumbled in the far distance. She clicked, the page loaded, and the ranch title header flashed in all caps. Immediate action required. The clock ticks on the foreclosure every second louder. The numbers stared back at her, cold and unblinking. 60 days to respond. 14 days until official lien filing. 7 days until public notice. Each deadline was a thread unraveling from the hem of her life. Margaret sat motionless at the kitchen table, the foreclosure email glowing against the dim screen, illuminating her features. In pale light, somewhere behind her, Lily had gone silent. Then the breath came sharp and broken. Oh my God, Lily whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. This is real. Margaret didn't answer. Her jaw worked slightly, one finger twitching over the keyboard. She zoomed in on the financial schedule embedded in the documentary as interest. Projected auction valuation, every dollar a blow to the gut, and yet, not fatal. Not yet. Her phone buzzed. A text from Grace. Call me now. Margaret stood and left the kitchen without a word. Lily followed, barefoot, the floorboards creaking beneath her like warning shots. In the den. Margaret shut the door and hit call. Grace answered on the second ring. I saw it, Grace said. You have 3 options, none of them pretty. Margaret paced slowly, the hem of her robe catching around her ankles. We need to buy time. I can push a filing with the county clerk, argue that the debt structure is linked to unresolved ownership discrepancies. If we're lucky, it stalls them 2, maybe 3 weeks. But you'll need to front the escrow immediately. They won't pause the process without money in hand. How much? $78,000, and it needs to hit today. Margaret closed her eyes. Her pulse ticked in her ears. And if I do that, then I make them choke on paperwork while we find the hole he crawled through. I've already flagged a few things, deposits from a shell account that shouldn't exist. I think he's been funneling ranch income without declaration. Margaret opened her eyes. You think, I have proof. I just need access. The call ended with no goodbye. She walked back into the kitchen. Lily stood by the sink, pale and still. What's the plan? Her daughter asked softly. Margaret didn't answer right away. She opened her laptop again, navigated to the escrow portal. Her hand hovered over the keyboard. Behind her, her phone vibrated voicemail. Then again. For new messages, she didn't have to check the caller ID. She knew the voice that would be waiting. She clicked play. David's voice filled the room fast, clipped, almost wild beneath its polish. I just got off with Ron from the title office. What the hell is going on? Margaret, we agreed on this months ago. You were supposed to file jointly. Why isn't it cleared? Another message. You're making this harder than it has to be. If you're struggling, we can shift it, but don't jeopardize the whole property just to prove a point. Then a third shorter, but the mask was slipping. If you tank this, it's on you. Finally, the last dot silence for a moment. Then look, I moved some of the ranch funds last quarter, okay? It was just a stopgap. Nothing illegal. I was going to return it by tax time. But the books are tight right now. And he exhaled sharply, a sound like a man losing ground. Just don't do anything stupid. Margaret's spine straightened with every word, the arrogance, the gaslight folded into a confession. It wasn't just pressure, now it was theft. Quiet, cowardly theft. She turned back to her screen. Lily watched from the doorway, uncertain. You don't have to do it alone. Margaret looked up, eyes sharper than steel. I'm not. She clicked into the escrow transfer form, typed the routing numbers from the emergency fund. That account, David never believed she could keep afloat, line by line. She filled it in. Her finger hovered. She clicked, confirm heart in her throat as the screen loaded a single word, processing ... in the silence. My letter screamed louder than words. The rain had quieted to a steady whisper, tracing the kitchen windows like a breath against glass. Margaret sat alone in the dim hush, her pen moving deliberately across thick paper, the old stationery, cream-colored and weighty, the kind meant for births, deaths, or truths that couldn't survive a screen. She didn't title it, number, name, no date, just the ache of everything she couldn't say out loud, inked in her own steady hand. But it began with a memory. Jenna's first horseback ride, the sun low behind the ridge, David's laugh echoing across the fence line, before it turned into something colder, something calculating. She wrote about that shift, when laughter became leverage, when silence became survival. Halfway down the page, her pen paused. She looked up, not blinking. And then she kept writing. This isn't surrender, she wrote. This is the map I leave behind, in case you ever wonder who I really was beneath the roles you gave me. When she folded the letter, her hands didn't tremble. She slid it into an envelope, unsealed, and tucked it into the back of the desk drawer beneath a stack of birth certificates and expired tax forms. She closed it slowly, listening for the soft click as it latched. Footsteps on the porch broke, the silence Lily's key in the lock. The door opened quietly. Hey, her daughter said. Backpack slung low, eyes tired. Hey, Margaret answered. She didn't mention the sleepless night, the way her body had stayed frozen in bed, eyes on the ceiling, heart beating too fast to be called rest. Lily dropped her bag by the stairs. She looked like she had something to ask but didn't. Instead, she opened the fridge and pulled out juice, pouring to glasses, like a peace offering. She set one in front of Margaret, then hesitated before sitting down. You've already done the thing, Lily said, not as a question. I have, Margaret replied. No fanfare, no confession. The girl nodded, like she'd known before she even came through the door. Margaret's phone buzzed on the counter. Grace. She picked it up. Yes, transfers holding, Grace said. The bank wants final scheduling too. Disperse to the clerk's office. You've got until noon tomorrow before it loops back. Margaret nodded. I'll handle it. Make sure you do it from your branch. They'll ask for ID in person. Margaret froze, a sudden silence crashing over her like a second sunset when the doctor paused. I braced. This is my real fight. The waiting room was far too quiet, too clean. Margaret sat beneath a framed photo of a mountain range she'd never seen, arms folded, breath shallow. Lily sat beside her, eyes fixed on the floor, hands gripping the hem of her sweatshirt like it was the edge of a cliff. Grace's voice echoed in her mind. The test results are back. They had driven to the specialist before dawn, headlights cutting through morning fog, words between them sparse but weighted. Now, the door to the exam room creaked open, and the doctor stepped in with a tablet in hand and the soft solemnity of a man who'd delivered both relief and wreckage. He sat, smiled, gently. It's early, he said, and that's good. You caught it in time. The pause came next, the one Margaret had braced for. There's a small mass in the lower quadrant. We're staging it as a 1A. It hasn't spread. The room swayed for a second. Lily gasped beside her and covered her mouth. Margaret reached out, wrapping her hand around her daughter's, anchoring them both. What's next? Margaret asked, voice level. Lumpectomy, the doctor replied. Then a short course of radiation. Prognosis is strong. You'll need to make some adjustments, rest, recovery, but you have time. You have options. Margaret nodded once. Then, let's begin. He gave a slow nod in return and handed over the treatment packet, pages thick with diagrams and language meant to educate, not soften. When he left, Lily broke. Tears spilled over, silent at first, then sudden and full. Margaret turned in her seat, cradling her daughter's head to her chest, brushing trembling fingers through her hair. "It's okay," she murmured. "I'm okay." Lily couldn't speak, just clung tighter. They left the clinic just after 9. The morning sun had turned silver, slicing through the clouds like a promise. Back home, Margaret moved slowly, a little more aware of her breath. She placed the treatment folder on the kitchen counter and began packing a small overnight bag with deliberate hands, comfortable clothes, reading glasses, a notebook. She'd decided before they left the office. The ranch would be her refuge, her soil to heal in. It was hers now, not just in ink, but in truth. A place once tied to betrayal, now becoming something different. She zipped the bag shut and turned to find David standing in the doorway. He didn't say a word. His eyes scanned her face, then flicked to the folder on the counter. "I heard," he said quietly. Margaret didn't answer. She stepped past him and placed her bag by the door. "I didn't know," he added. "I know." He moved toward her slowly. "If you need anything," she turned then, met his eyes. "I'll let you know if I do." He nodded. Nothing else, no performance, no strategy, and somehow, that was enough. By late afternoon, the sun stretched wide over the fields as Margaret's car pulled down the gravel drive. The ranch came into view, familiar, quiet, and new all at once. The barn's roofline shimmered in the heat. The front porch had a rocking chair now. Sarah must have added it. She parked beside the small guest cottage, stepping out slowly, the scent of sage and dust filling her lungs. She walked to the porch, dropped her bag, and sought her breath steady, her spirit both worn and undefeated. The land felt different beneath her now. Not haunted, just open. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. Message from Sarah. "We need help setting up the nursery." Margaret smiled faintly and typed, "I'm here." New life on the land and hope in our hearts. The nursery was still more idea than space, fresh paint drying on walls the color of sage and cream. Cardboard boxes stacked in corners, and sunlight pooling across unfinished floors. But it breathed with promise. Margaret stood near the window, holding a curtain rod as Sarah climbed a small step stool. They worked in quiet rhythm, exchanging only glances and nods. Margaret steadied the base. Sarah adjusted the brackets. Lily sat cross-legged on the floor, sorting baby books into tidy rows, humming softly under her breath. "You always this precise?" Sarah asked, drilling the last screw into place. "Only when it matters," Margaret replied, smoothing the curtain's edge with her palm. They paused, just for a second, surveying the room. It still needed trim, a rug, a crib, but it already had something better intention. It felt built with care, not fear. David hovered near the doorway, hands in his pockets, eyes unreadable. "I don't know where to start," he said. Sarah didn't look at him. "That's a start." Margaret turned slowly. "If you want in, come in, but be useful." His lips quirked faintly at the edge, humility or sarcasm. It was hard to tell. Still, he crossed the threshold and took a folded box from Lily without being asked. For the next hour, the house filled with sound, packing tape, laughter, the occasional creak of old wood shifting under new weight. A moment arrived where Margaret found herself shoulder to shoulder with David at the window, adjusting the lock that had long stuck since winter. "Lease needs updating," he said softly. "We should build in guardianship clauses." Margaret didn't look at him. "Draft it." He nodded once. By dusk, the nursery glowed. A rocking chair in the corner. A mobile hung half-finished from the ceiling. The smell of lemon cleaner and something sweeter anticipation. Lily emerged from the hallway, barefoot, holding a small welcome mat she'd found rolled in the back closet. She uncurled it gently and placed it outside the door. "Figured we could stop wiping our feet on the past," she said. Sarah smiled, tears in her eyes that she didn't wipe away. "I can't wait for him to meet his grandma," she whispered. Margaret froze, the words landing like sunlight after a long storm. Not the label she'd worn titles her whole life, but the tone. Sarah's voice had no irony in it, no bitterness, just truth, just hope. David sat down on the hallway bench and said nothing. The moment stretched long, held still in breath. Outside, the fields swayed in the wind. Inside, a room waited for a life not yet born and a legacy not written in contracts, but in choice. Margaret's phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. She walked to it.com and steady. Jake, Jake, she answered. Still thinking of you, he said. Editor, wants to do a Mother's Day feature. Something with weight. You've become that. Margaret's eyes wandered back down the hall, to the nursery, to Lily and Sarah and David still kneeling by a pile of toy bins. You want me to say something about motherhood? She asked. I want you to say what no one else will. She was quiet a long moment. Jake waited. Then she said, I'm in. And the screen faded to black. Standing behind the mic, I felt seen for the first time. The breeze carried the scent of fresh soil and lavender as Margaret stepped onto the makeshift stage built under the sycamore at the edge of the ranch. White folding chairs stretched out in neat rows beneath strings of warm cafe lights. Children played in the distance, the echo of laughter braided with birdsong. It was Mother's Day. But this wasn't the version sold in department stores. Jake stood to the side with his camera crew, already filming. The banner behind her read, Women Who Reclaimed the Land, and Themselves. Margaret looked out across the field, her fingers grazing the edge of the wooden podium. A microphone stood ready, waiting for her voice. She saw familiar faces in the crowd. Grace, seated with arms folded and a rare softness in her expression. Jenna, flown in last minute, tears already welled. Lily sat in the front row, hands folded neatly in her lap. Eyes locked on her mother. Sarah stood beside her, a hand on her gently swelling belly, smiling. David lingered just behind the chairs, uncertain but present, his posture unsure, but he'd shown up. That mattered more than she expected. Margaret took a deep breath and began. When I was younger, I thought legacy meant land, deeds, titles, something with weight you could hold in your palm and say, I earned this. But I was wrong. Legacy isn't what you build, it's what you survive. And who you teach to keep walking when the wind tries to knock them down. The breeze fluttered her blouse gently. She looked up, eyes meeting the crowd. I was a wife, then I was an ex. I was a partner in silence. And now I'm a woman who said, enough. And I've never been more whole. Scattered applause began, soft, reverent. But this isn't just about me, she continued, her voice gaining strength. It's about all of us who were told our worth was conditional, on our quiet, on our sacrifice, on our ability to disappear. Lily reached up and brushed a tear away. Sarah stood straighter. I stayed too long in rooms where I wasn't heard. And I built lives inside shadows that didn't belong to me. But today, this ranch, this table, this child coming into the world, it's all proof that we get to begin again, on our terms. Applause broke louder this time, genuine, surprised even Margaret. Jake lowered the camera slightly, nodding to his team. Margaret took one final breath. And to every woman who thinks it's too late to fight, know this: it's never too late to tell the truth, especially to yourself. A standing ovation followed. Some people clapped through tears. Others simply held their hands to their hearts. Margaret stepped back, blinking rapidly as the applause rolled over her like warmth. Then, quietly, a woman from the back stepped forward, short, gray-haired, her dress faded but pressed. She handed something small to the local official who had organized the brunch. The official walked up the steps and placed it into Margaret's hands, a small plaque, wooden hand, carved in recognition of quiet bravery and unquiet change. Margaret looked down at it, then up again. Even the mayor, usually restrained, stood in the front row, clapping softly, his eyes misted. Lily came up first, arms out. Sarah followed, then David. They didn't speak, they just stood beside her, anchoring the moment in shared gravity. Margaret looked out at the land green now, fertile. Her voice cracked, just for a second, as she leaned toward the mic one last time. Thank you. The hush that followed wasn't awkward, it was sacred. She stepped away from the podium, heart light, hands still trembling but not from fear. The breeze lifted her hair as she smiled, ready for whatever came next. He called me disposable today. I am indispensable. Laughter carried across the pasture like wind chimes. Children ran barefoot between tables dressed in gingham and peonies, sticky fingers wrapped around lemonade cups. The brunch had stretched long into the afternoon, plates replaced by pie tins and coffee mugs, conversation easy, limbs loose. Margaret sat beneath the old sycamore again, no longer on a stage, just on a simple wooden bench in its shade. Her heels were off. Her feet touched soil. Across the lawn, Lily held a clipboard, managing the last of the catering crew. Her hair was up, her shoulders square. The girl she had raised was now a woman she admired. Sarah emerged from the guest house, the baby wrapped in a soft blue blanket, his face round and pink against her chest. She walked with quiet purpose, slow steps. When she reached Margaret, she didn't speak, just offered the bundle into her arms. Margaret accepted without hesitation. The boy blinked up at her, lips puckering, hands fisting into the air like small declarations. Her arms knew what to do. The weight of him wasn't heavy, it was grounding. From the side, David rose slowly. He held no paper, no microphone, just a glass of water and his own voice. Some of you know me. Some of you know of me. A few chuckles, a few stiff silences. He looked toward Margaret, then the child in her arms. I have not always been the man I wanted to be, he said, but I've always known who she is. He nodded toward Margaret. My mother didn't just raise me. She saved me, even when I didn't deserve it, and now she's holding my son. His voice broke. He didn't hide it. Thank you, he finished. There was no applause, just silence, heavy, honest, then a few claps, then more. Lily stepped up beside Margaret and reached into her bag, pulled out a folded piece of cream paper, the old stationery. The letter? She said gently. Margaret looked up, surprised. I never meant it's time, Lily said. You wrote it for a reason. She opened it carefully, voice steady. This isn't surrender. This is the map I leave behind in case you ever wonder who I really was beneath the rolls you gave me. As Lily read, a hush fell. Even the children slowed. Margaret watched faces soften, neighbors, strangers, the mayor wiping at his eyes again. She could feel the pulse of the moment, something that didn't belong to her alone anymore. When the letter ended, no one spoke. They simply rose. All of them, as if standing was the only way to hold the weight of her truth. Sarah stepped back beside David. He lifted his phone, quietly filming Margaret as she cradled the newborn, her smile soft, private. She saved all of us, he whispered. Margaret didn't hear him, but she felt it. The baby stirred in her arms, his eyes opened briefly, catching the sunlight as it danced through the leaves overhead. She kissed his forehead, inhaled. The land smelled like sage and new beginnings. Her chest rose slowly, deeply, her whole body breathing. Yes, the frame widened, Lily laughing, Sarah leaning against David, Margaret in the center with the child in her arms, as the ranch hummed with life, and everything quietly began again. The phone call came before sunrise. Margaret sat at the kitchen table in her robe, the coffee untouched beside her, while Grace's voice cut clean through the speaker. He doesn't have a legal leg, Margaret. He signed the third-party clause himself back in March. If he forgot, that's his mistake. But now that his name's attached to a lease that ties him to Sarah's timeline, he's in it, whether he likes it or not. Margaret said nothing, just nodded as she listened, hand resting atop a stack of printed pages. Her thumb tapped once, then twice. Grace continued. If he tries to force removal, we cite non-veto status. He's tied in name only. His income disclosures will confirm he benefited, even if he claims ignorance. And if he escalates, we have paper trails, escrow footprints, and 2 signed leases. A shadow flicked across the front window. Tires on, gravel. Margaret looked up just as headlights cut across the living room wall. Grace heard it too. He's there, isn't he? Margaret stood. Yes, don't engage alone. Keep the line open. But Margaret was already walking toward the door. She didn't flinch when he barged in without knocking. David's coat was wet again. He didn't care. His hair was a mess, eyes bloodshot, lips thinned to a nearly colorless slash. You dragged me into this. He tossed a crumpled paper across the table. The least you let it sit. You added my name, Margaret. You roped me into a liability is unstable and you know it. Margaret didn't move. You signed. You were informed. I didn't know she was pregnant. She didn't know either. Life doesn't wait for your terms anymore. David's breath caught in his throat. I can't be responsible for this. I have a career, board seats, assets that can't survive this kind of accountability. He stared at her, raw, wounded, and furious. Where's the original? He snapped. BAFTA. Margaret moved calmly to the drawer, pulled out the sealed envelope, and laid it beside his crumpled version. Then she walked to the coffee pot. Want some? He scoffed. You're offering me coffee. It's raining. You look tired. He didn't take the cup, just stood in the center of the kitchen like a man trying to remember how he used to win. Margaret sat, sipping quietly. You're not bluffing, are you? He finally asked. She raised one brow. What would be the point? The silence stretched, thick and sour. Lily stepped into the doorway, a towel around her shoulders from the upstairs shower. She froze when she saw him. The room held its breath. Dad. His head jerked toward her. He straightened, eyes softening for a second. Hey, Lil. She didn't smile. Margaret didn't rise. Everything's fine. We were just finishing up. Lily nodded slowly, then stepped back into the hallway. But she didn't leave. She stayed within earshot, listening. David turned back, hands on his hips. You want a war? Fine. But don't think this ends with a lease. You're not the only one who knows how to play strategy. Margaret didn't blink. You're the only one playing. He stood there, rattled, defeated but unwilling to fall. Then he snatched the envelope and stormed out. The door left wide in his wake. Margaret rose and closed it gently. No sound, no rush. In the quiet that followed, the only noise came from her phone, still glowing on the counter. A banner notification slid across the screen, trending, the hidden battle. Behind a local ranch, one woman's quiet rebellion. Margaret tapped it on, saw her own photo at the top of the article. Outrage and applause painted the comments page. Margaret stared at her own face on the screen. It wasn't the photo that bothered her, taken years ago at a community gala, her smile practiced, pearls catching the light. It was the headline, blunt, feminized, designed to draw clicks. The ranch wife who refused to fold. Below, the floodgates had opened. She scrolled, pulse steady but eyes burning. The comments came in waves, some in all caps, others elegant and quiet, each one its own kind of truth or poison. Entitled much. Must be nice to cry oppression from a ranch house. Finally someone saying it. These men think land equals legacy. It doesn't. I know this woman. She's always been calculated. Lily stepped into the room, holding a bowl of cereal, her mouth tight. Maybe don't read the bottom half. Margaret didn't look away. She read one aloud, voice even. She built nothing, and wants half. Sounds familiar. Then, with a breath, she scrolled again, and read another. My mom left a man like him too. She didn't write about it. I wish she had. Thank you, Margaret. Her voice caught slightly. She didn't let it crack. The phone rang again, Jake's name on the screen. The local reporter who'd first posted the piece on his blog before it was picked up statewide. She didn't answer. Not yet. Another message pinged through. This one from David. Pull the story. Now. This affects more than you. Margaret exhaled. He's worried about exposure, not accuracy. She sat down at the desk, opened her laptop, and opened a new document. The cursor blinked at the top of a clean page. No headline yet. Just the space you're going to write. It, Lily asked. Yes, Margaret said. All of it. My voice. Not theirs. Lily sat beside her, bowl balanced on one knee, and watched as the words began to form. Not legalese, not veiled tones, but truth plain and unvarnished. She wrote about being praised for silence, rewarded for compliance. She wrote about the deals made in hushed rooms and the penalties of becoming inconvenient. She wrote about the ranch not as property, but as proof. A place built on assumptions she had finally outlived. When she paused, Lily leaned over and made a small change, tightening a line, adjusting the rhythm. Margaret watched her daughter's face as she edited. You're good at this, Margaret said softly. Lily shrugged. You gave me the story. I'm just shaping it. When the final sentence landed, Margaret leaned back, her breath long and full for the first time that day. She hit save. Then, attached. The email draft was already queued, addressed to the editorial inbox Jake had sent with his last message. Margaret hovered for a moment. Not afraid, just aware. She clicked send. Silence returned, thick and satisfied. Lily placed her hand gently on her mother's shoulder. You did it. Margaret didn't speak, just nodded. Then her laptop pinged a new email. From the editor. We're live Saturday morning. Margaret stared at the screen and whispered, then we let it burn. I disclosed my heart and strangers recognized themselves. By the time the op-ed went live, the sky was molten. Sunset spilled gold across the kitchen tile as Margaret sat at the table, breath shallow, hands idle. The email from the editor had landed 5 minutes ago. The piece was out. She clicked the link. The title stood in serif font, clean and bold, owning what was never mine until I claimed it. Her name, in smaller print, just beneath. She didn't read the article again. She didn't need to. Every line lived inside her now. Instead, her eyes wandered to the comment thread already beginning to grow. At first, the words came one by one, then in clusters, then waves. I thought I was alone. I'm not. Thank you. You make women like my mother visible. Liar. Playing victim to rewrite your life. Shameful. Margaret didn't flinch. Not this time. She clicked open her inbox. New messages stacked like bricks. Some scathing, some tender. All charged. A woman from Tulsa. I'm 67. You've put into words what I've swallowed for decades. Another from Idaho. My daughters are watching me cry. I'm going to let them. And then, quietly, from someone she hadn't expected, Sarah. Read it twice. Wish I'd had your spine 10 years ago. Baby's fine, by the way. Just thought you'd want to know. Margaret's throat tightened. She leaned forward, hands trembling over the keys. She didn't reply. Not yet. A soft sniff behind her. Lily, standing in the doorway again, eyes glassy. Margaret looked up. I didn't know it would feel like this. Lily crossed the room and wrapped her arms around her mother from behind, resting her chin on Margaret's shoulder. I did. They stayed like that, the lights softening to blue outside the window, until Margaret's phone buzzed on the table. An unfamiliar name. She opened it. Ms. Danvers. We'd be honored if you'd speak at our Women's Resilience Forum next month. Your story is moving more people than you know. She read the message 3 times, then set the phone down slowly. The sun had dipped fully now. The kitchen sat in deepening shadow, but the screen still glowed. Upstairs, somewhere distant, Margaret knew David was reading the piece. He hadn't written, hadn't called, but she knew him. Knew the silence he used when he was processing damage. Control. Somewhere, he was sweating beneath a curated calm, every word of hers reflecting back his reflection. And still, she didn't want his apology. She only wanted truth. Lily sat beside her again, leg pressed lightly against hers. You should go, she said. Speak. Let them hear your voice. Margaret nodded slowly. Maybe I will. The moment sat like breath between notes. Then her phone rang. Grace. Margaret answered. Hey. Grace's voice was quieter than usual. No preamble. The test results are back.